Despite talk of a green transition, Canada is still dependent on oil and gas. While not a major part of Canada's electricity mix, our country's reliance on gasoline and diesel for transportation means that the price of gas impacts everything from transportation costs of virtually everything you buy to the price of your summer holiday. In this video, we will put Canada's oil industry under the microscope in order to understand where oil is produced, how it moves around the country, how and where it is refined, and its far-reaching impact on our economy. Commercial oil extraction in Canada began in deep southwestern Ontario in 1858 when James Miller Williams hand-dug an oil well near the town now known as Oil Springs. In the following years, oil wells sprung up near Oil Springs and nearby Petrolia, and oil was shipped in barrels by horse and later train to refining facilities in Sarnia. While oil extraction here only continues on a small scale, Sarnia remains a major oil refining and petrochemical center, earning it the nickname of Chemical Valley. Alberta is home to Canada's largest oil deposits. These deposits have been used by local Indigenous groups since time immemorial as a waterproofing agent for canoes and as an insect repellent. Alberta's oil industry began in 1947 with the discovery of oil at the Leduc No. 1 oil well. In the following years, oil wells sprung up all over Alberta, and a network of pipelines was constructed to export this oil to the Pacific, to refineries in eastern Canada, and later to the Gulf Coast. Then, following decades of this conventional oil drilling, new technology allowed for more cost-efficient extraction of oil from Alberta's vast oil sands deposits. In the late 1960s, oil was also discovered off of Canada's east coast, first off Nova Scotia near Sable Island, and later in the Grand Banks near Newfoundland. Offshore oil drilling near Sable Island began in 1992, but reserves were quickly exhausted and production ended in 1999. In 1997, much larger reserves were discovered about 300 kilometers from St. John's in the Grand Banks region, with oil fields like Hibernia providing a significant economic boost to the island of Newfoundland following the collapse of the cod fishery. Hydraulic fracturing, or fracking, of oil shale deposits began in Canada in 2005, but is not occurring at nearly the scale of fracking operations in the US. Most Canadian fracking is centered in the Bakken Formation, which extends into southern Saskatchewan from North Dakota. But other oil shale deposits exist throughout the country. Canada's oil history is peppered with environmental tragedies. From tanker spills to disastrous train derailments, transporting oil can be incredibly dangerous. Environmental contamination from the Athabasca oil sands has impacted drinking water and food in downstream communities like Fort Chipewyan. Input from Indigenous communities has often been ignored when oil infrastructure like pipelines and tanker ports are built on their traditional lands, including during the recent construction of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. Geologically, not all oil is created equal, meaning that each type of oil requires different refining infrastructure. Oil with a higher proportion of short-chain hydrocarbons is called light oil and is more valuable as it produces jet fuel and gasoline after refining. Oil with more long-chain hydrocarbons is called heavy oil and is often used in fuel for large marine vessels. Oil can also be differentiated based on its sulfur content, with sweet oil containing less sulfur than sour oil and being more valuable as less processing is needed to remove this sulfur. While oil refineries can be found throughout Canada, their capacity is not sufficient to refine all of the oil produced in Alberta. Further, many of them, including every refinery east of Montreal, were created to refine foreign oil and are thus not connected to the pipeline network in our country. For these reasons, much of the heavy, often sour oil produced in Alberta is shipped to the Gulf Coast to be refined alongside similar oil from Venezuela. Conversely, much of the light oil that America is now producing due to new fracking projects cannot be refined using infrastructure in Texas, making Texas's heavy oil refineries dependent on Alberta oil despite America's ongoing fracking boom. Pipeline construction in North America is controversial due to their potential for spills, promotion of greenhouse gas emissions, and encroachment on Indigenous lands. For these reasons, very few pipelines have been built in Canada since the 1950s. Many of these original pipelines are part of the Enbridge system, which brings oil eastward from Alberta through the American Midwest and into Ontario and Montreal. Part of the system is Line 5, which sits at the bottom of the Strait of Mackinac. A rupture of this line would create a massive oil spill in Lakes Michigan and Huron, causing extensive damage to the environment, the region's fisheries, drinking water, and the tourism industry. To the west, the Trans Mountain Pipeline was also built in the 1950s to transport Alberta oil to British Columbia and to refineries in Washington state. This pipeline was recently expanded by the Canadian government, tripling its capacity at a cost of over $30 billion. To the north, the Norman Wells Pipeline connects oil from the community of Norman Wells to the Alberta Pipeline Network and beyond. Additional oil and gas pipelines were planned in the Mackenzie Valley all the way up to the Beaufort Sea, but such efforts were blocked by the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline Inquiry and other advocacy efforts by Indigenous groups in the area. To the south, projects like the Express Pipeline and the Keystone Pipeline connect Alberta oil to the American Pipeline Network, where it is transported to refineries in Illinois and Texas. An expansion to the Keystone Pipeline, known as Keystone XL, was blocked by the Biden administration. These southward oil exports represent the majority of oil leaving Alberta, as about 95% of crude oil extracted in Canada is exported to the United States for refining. Due to a lack of new pipeline capacity in the late 2010s and the early 2020s, larger and larger amounts of oil began being transported from Alberta by rail. The amount capped out at just under 5% in the early 2020s. Transporting oil by rail is 2.5 times more costly and 2.5 times more dangerous than transporting it by pipeline by unit volume, with several derailments and spills occurring, including the aforementioned Lac-Mégantic tragedy in 2013. The proportion of oil transported by rail has dropped significantly since the opening of the Trans Mountain expansion. Oil tankers are used on Canada's east and west coasts to transport oil to global markets. Smaller tankers are used in the St. Lawrence Seaway system to reach local markets, accounting for 7% of seaway traffic. Tankers do not traverse the Canadian Arctic, and they are currently banned on the northern coast of BC through the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act passed in 2019. In Canada, both federal and provincial governments provide subsidies to the oil industry in the form of tax breaks, public financing for new oil and gas projects, grants for carbon capture and storage projects, and COVID-19 stimulus spending. Canada's purchase of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion at a cost of $4.5 billion, combined with an additional $12.6 billion investment in its construction, could also be seen as a fossil fuel subsidy. Finally, taxpayers and those who hold insurance policies also often pay for the many environmental externalities of the oil and gas industry, including oil spill cleanup and drinking water contamination, dealing with Canada's many uncapped oil and gas wells, and costs associated with worsening fire, flood, drought, and heat events caused by anthropogenic climate change. Thank you for making it to the end of this True North Geography deep dive on Canada's oil industry. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that bell button so you do not miss out on any new videos.